Hi everyone, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I'm here with a very belated January reading wrap-up. In the month of January, I read some really great books. Please accept my sincerest apologies for missing a week of filming and for being so late with this January wrap-up. Life happened and got in the way of filming, but I'm glad that I could film today, and let's just get into the books. This will probably be a very long video because I have a lot to say about all of the books I read, but I will leave the books down below and when I start talking about them so you can skip to what you're interested in. So the first book that I read in the month of January was White Trash, The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America by Nancy Eisenberg. Now, I had started this book in December, I think, but I finished it in the month of January. This is a nonfiction book, and the main idea behind this book was that the U.S. is not and has never actually been a meritocracy, that there is no American dream and no upward mobility in the sense that we all believe. It was a very interesting book and certainly one I'm glad I listened to on audiobook. I sort of zoned in and out of focus while listening to it. It's dense and it's packed full of historic information. It makes many historical points that are very insightful, particularly with regards to the role of land ownership in relation to class issues. And it posits that land has a long history of being tied with class in the United States. Though I think it sort of misses the ball when it comes more towards the modern history. It didn't really address the issue that we have now of student loans, or how there's been sort of a recent shift to not buying but renting instead because of the financial situation of many of the people in their 20s and 30s nowadays. I also think that two major drawbacks of this book are that it discusses the poor and the white trash from an outsider's point of view. The topics are discussed and defined by the upper class or from a very detached and historical viewpoint. I also think that race was not fully addressed in this book. If you're going to title it White Trash, I think that discussing how the white poor deserve their own category and their own history should be examined more thoroughly. You need to identify who is white, what is white, and how is that different than the other poor Americans, specifically African Americans, but there are other groups that are also poor, other immigrant groups that are just completely left by the wayside. The one time where it did sort of discuss really what I was looking for in terms of race relation was when it actually talked about Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, when it pitted Mayella Ewell against Tom Robinson in the jury or the viewer or reader's eyes. Of course, I'm aware that addressing all of these facts about race and poverty in their entirety would be quite an ambitious task for a book. And this book is already pretty ambitious. It tackles history from the colonial period to modern times and talks about tons of different topics from Davy Crockett to Indiana Hoosiers and even President Jackson. So it really covers a lot of ground, and I do think it was worth reading. So you should give it a shot if you're interested in history, specifically U.S. history. If you're interested in race relations, I know I said it didn't cover it enough, but it does touch on it a bit. And if you have a background in race relations, I think you can bring something really interesting to the piece of work. The next book I read is actually not a book at all, but a play, and that was The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. So it was amazing and humorous and full of Wilde's witticism. On the surface, it appears to be an absurd sort of play, but at heart it examines the relationship between a symbol or a signifier and the thing it represents. If you don't know, the play's central plot hinges on mistaken identities and the pun of earnest as a name and being earnest as in being truthful. It delves into our connection with fiction, both as readers and writers, in a fascinating way that I still haven't fully worked out, I don't think. I was, however, disappointed in Wilde's portrayal of female characters. They seemed really flat to me and silly and infantile at times, and I do think that was part of the point of the play, though I've heard that Wilde does better portrayals of female characters in some of his other plays, like Lady Windermere's Fan and An Ideal Husband. So I look forward to reading those, which come highly recommended from a whole group of booktubers. If you've read The Importance of Being Earnest or seen the movie, I haven't actually seen the movie yet, but I probably should. If you've read the book or seen the movie, I'd be really interested in hearing your point of view on the subject of women or of mistaken identity or fiction representation. I thought it was a really interesting play with a lot more to talk about, and yeah, I can't wait to hear your ideas. I also finished the Etymologicon by Mark Forsyth in January. It took me a really long time to get through. I listened to it on audiobook, and it was mesmerizing. It had this wonderful circuitous nature in which Forsyth rambled about the origins of words, and I learned such fascinating tidbits of information. It's definitely a great nonfiction read for anyone who loves words. It includes some basic concepts of linguistics. If you have a moment to look up anticlasis, I'll write the word below. It's a principle that explains how the word buffalo repeated 8 times is actually a grammatically correct sentence in the English language. So I found that fascinating, personally. And I learned things like how the sky is related to the Viking word for cloud, and the origins of the phrase humble pie. I learned how the guillotine is ironically named for somebody who is actually against the death penalty. And there are just so many more seemingly random facts that were tied together beautifully in this book. It's a really fun book for anyone who's interested in language or even history, I think, and certainly linguistics. The next book I read in the month of January was The Warden, and I talked a little bit about my experience with The Warden in the Netflix tag video. I'll link it up above or down below, or maybe both, but I thought this book was absolutely wonderful. I expected a boring story about Victorian church politics, but what I gleaned from the book was wonderfully crafted, and it was a story that seemed to speak to modern day media and workplace politics. The book's about the warden, whose name is Mr. Harding, and he has a cushy position as a clergyman. He's in possession of an income from a charity, and his position, as well as his claim to that money that he receives, is being challenged by a character named John Bold. John Bold serves as an activist representing those that Mr. Harding serves, and he thinks that he's exposing what he deems to be an abuse of privilege, church privilege, but you can really see it as sort of any type of privilege that can even be applied to our modern day society. But this, of course, causes Mr. Harding to seriously question his position as a warden because he views himself as a morally upstanding person, and he just never really contemplated his living and his position as warden. Of course, all of this is incredibly complicated by the fact that John Bold is in love with the warden's daughter. So you can see how this act of uncovering this supposed injustice unfolds, and it affects all of those involved. Not to mention that Trollope's writing is superb. If you like Victorian fiction or books that center around like lawsuits, union disputes, politics, etc., this might be for you. Plus, it's part of a series, so I can't wait to get my hands on the next book. And next, I then, of course, read the Lioness Quartet, which is a series of 4 books by Tamora Pierce, and I read all 4 in one weekend, one magical weekend where I had a sleepover with a bunch of amazing girls. I actually made a whole video on that called Sleepovers and Series, so I don't want to discuss it much more here because I think I've really expressed all of my thoughts in that other video, where I just discussed my experiences with series, and at the end I review this set of books. It is safe to say, though, that I wish I had read some Tamora Pierce growing up. And last but not least, I read Anne of Green Gables for the first time this month as a buddy read with Laura from Narglecatcher. I fell in love with Anne Shirley, the spunky redhead, and I loved watching her find a home and grow up. I think that for a children's book, it brought up so many fascinating conversations and themes. It was written in 1908, but it didn't feel dated to me, and I'm not really sure why. Parts of it, of course, were dated, treating sicknesses with ipecac, and the type of clothes she wears, dresses with puffed sleeves that she wants. I mean, that's obviously not something that modern readers can empathize with, but I mean, they can. Maybe it's not puffed sleeves, but it's the new... I don't know what's in fashion these days, but you know what I'm saying. That type of desire to have what's fashionable is still something that would apply to children. So I think it was surprisingly timeless, and I think the main differences between the book and a child's life today could be attributed to the idea that she lived on a rural farm, which is just something I'm not familiar with, so perhaps it was more dated than I knew. But I think there's a reason that the book is still popular today and that its legacy endures. Also, Anne and her foster mother's relationship is particularly interesting. Marilla is so hard on Anne, but they both love each other dearly, and that really shows throughout the book. The idea of female friendship is also particularly well examined in this book, and I think it's important to note how Diana remains Anne's best friend, or bosom friend, if you will, despite a plot point that makes their friendship forbidden by Diana's parents. There's also an interesting theme of nature and spirituality and how that coincides with friendship. There's so many references to light and friendship in the book that I just don't think can be ignored. And overall, I found this to be a fantastic book that I would recommend to almost everyone. I also really like how the back of my book, I have it here, the back of my book is actually updated to appeal to kids. It reads, "It's a million times nicer to be Anne of Green Gables than Anne of Nowhere in particular, isn't it? My dislikes, being an orphan, having red hair, being called carrots by Gilbert Blythe. My likes, living at Green Gables with Marilla and Matthew, my bosom friend, Diana, dresses with puffed sleeves. My regrets, dyeing my hair green, smashing a slate over Gilbert Blythe's head. My dream, to tame my temper, to be good. This is an uphill struggle. To grow up to have auburn hair." And then it actually has all these really cute, quizzes and recipes in the very back of the book, as well as a little glossary for some outdated terms that kids might not know nowadays, and a sort of character dictionary. So I think it's just a really sweet copy of the book and very accessible to children. So that is what I read in the month of January. I look forward to hearing what you guys read in the month of January. I've actually watched a bunch of your videos on that already. And if you have any comments on the books that I did read this month, please let me know in the comments down below. And if there was anything in particular that I said that interested you, I'd love to talk about it with you. Thank you so much for watching the entirety of this long video, and I look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Bye! Feel the